Hi, I'm author Erin Entrada Kelly, and I want to talk to you about bravery through creativity. Now, when we think of that word brave, we often think of capital B brave, a character charging into a dark forest, for example, or someone defeating an evil beast or monster. And while those things are obviously brave, there are many, many different ways to be brave. And one example is facing an empty page or canvas. So this is my sketchbook. And whenever I think about bravery, I don't always think about the courage it takes to face a blank sheet of paper. But when I think about the writers that I know, the creators that I know, the artists that I know, it occurs to me that the things that we all experience whenever we put ourselves out there can really take an act of courage to kind of overcome those things. For example, we are often, all of us, you included, I'm sure, are our worst critics. And one thing I love to do, for example, whenever I'm stressed or blue or down or just plain bored, is I like to draw little cities and towns and villages. And this is just for me. It's not, no one's ever going to see it. It's not something that I'm going to publish. But even when I was doing this, even though it's just for my own amusement, I was very self-critical of myself. Oh, that line is crooked. That building is out of proportion. This doesn't look like the way you imagined it. And it can take a lot of courage and bravery to overcome the negative self-talk that we often engage in with ourselves, especially when we're creating something. Here's another drawing that I did just for my own amusement. So this is a giraffe wearing, as you can see, 5 scarves, because in my imagination, one of the things I love is the power of imagination, right? So no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, we have our imaginations with us and we can access it at any time that we want and see where it takes us, which sometimes can be a very perilous and interesting journey, but we do it anyway, which also takes courage, right? So when I drew this giraffe, you see his legs there, his feet? I couldn't quite get them right, and I engaged in that negative self-talk, which is usually the worst enemy, right, of whenever we're trying to create. But I just kept going. I drew his little feet, and I colored him, even though I wasn't completely happy with how he looked. Another thing I love to do is to invent characters. Now, this is just for me. It's not characters that will appear in any books. It's just things that I conjured up, because another thing that I love about the power of imagination is not just our ability to access it at any time that we want, but also the power that it gives us. So in life, in our everyday life, sometimes we can feel very powerless, right? Because if you're a grown-up, you have to go to work every day. If you're not a grown-up, you have to go to school every day. And often your daily routine is dictated by other people or other things, whether it's a schedule or obligations or things that you have to do. So sometimes we can feel like we don't have enough power over our own destinies, but our imagination gives us that power if we have the courage to face the blank page, face our critics, and put it out there. You have to believe that you have something to say, and I guarantee you do. It just takes courage sometimes to say it through creativity. For example, this is my book, Lilani of the Distant Sea. It was my very first fantasy. So all the books I wrote before this were all realistic fiction. And when I started this journey, so Lilani goes on a dangerous journey, a quest to rescue her village, her mother, her friends from very dire circumstances. But I went on a journey as well to put Lilani on her journey. And it was a perilous journey because I was and am my worst critic. So I went through a lot of that frustrating self-doubt, thinking, okay, you're going to write a fantasy. You've never written a fantasy before. There's so many great fantasy novels out there. What makes you think you can add one to the mix? All this negative self-talk that I gave myself. And I'm sure you've experienced it too. And it does take courage to overcome that. It does take courage to build a self-belief in yourself. It does take courage to power through and face the blank sheet of paper every day, even though you may not know how it turns out. Because guess what? In addition to you being your own worst critic, there's also actual critics out there. whether it's your peers, whether it's readers if you're a writer like me, whether it's grown-ups in your life. Sometimes we put things out there and other people are going to see it and they are going to react to it, and that can be scary too. So it takes courage to put it on the page. One thing that I love is when I go to schools, when I meet young people, and they come up to me afterwards and they give me something that they've created, and I think, wow, this person faced a blank sheet of paper, faced a blank notebook paper, faced a blank sketchbook paper, and created something, and felt brave and safe enough to share it with me, even though they have no idea how I'm going to react. They've only known me for a very short period of time, but the fact that they felt brave enough to share their work really, really speaks to me. For example, this right here is a poem, and it's called Titus the Fish, and a boy named Samuel wrote it for me, and I loved it so much that I created this so I could hang it on my wall. Brave, right? He wrote a poem and he shared it with me. Even he was brave enough to write it, and then he was brave enough to share it. And here's a drawing from a reader, and she's an amazing artist. Look, sent that to me. Here's another one. This is a Blackbird Fly, was my very first book, and this reader drew all the characters as she saw them. She even gave me her rough draft. Right. It takes courage to not only put these things on paper, but to share them with someone. And the fact that these young people shared it with me makes me feel very, very special indeed. So I encourage you to face the blank sheet of paper, embrace your power of imagination, put yourself out there. It may not look the way you want it to look, it may not read the way you want it to read, but the fact that you're doing it is courageous in and of itself. And the more you do it, the more courageous you become, and the better the page looks. Are you ready to face the blank page together? If so, I have some tips on how you can get started. One of the things that I love to do is create characters, obviously because I write books and they need characters, but sometimes I also write characters just for fun that never go anywhere. So right now I want you to think of a character. One of the first things you might want to think about is their name. And once you know their name, how do they feel about their name? Names are very personal things, and most of us have very strong feelings about our name, one way or the other. So how does your character feel about their name? Also, what kind of person are they? What kinds of things are they afraid of, and what kinds of things do they want? One of the first things I do whenever I start a new book is, this is the notebook for We Dream of Space, this book here. The original title was This Bright Star, so that's why you see that up there. But one of the first things I did for this book and for many of my books is I write down the characters and their personality traits. So what is your character like? What are their personality traits? How do they see themselves, and how do other people see them? And what are they afraid of? And what do they want? Those are all questions I ask when I'm developing my characters. But let's say you don't want to write a realistic character. Let's say you want to invent a fantastical creature. We can do that too. So when you think of your fantastical creature, I want you to think, where do they live? Land, sea, or sky? And depending on where they live, that will give you information on what they look like. So if you have a creature who lives in the sky, for example, they may have wings. If you have a creature who lives in the sea, fins or tails. And if they live on the land, they may have tails as well. So think about what's your fantastical creature's personality? Are they scary and evil, or are they good and kind? And if they're scary and evil, why are they scary and evil? Do they have enemies? Who are their enemies? And why do they have those enemies? And if you're feeling particularly brave, you can draw your characters, whether it's a realistic human character or a fantastical character. Or maybe you create an inanimate object and make them into a character, like a pickle, for example, or a celery stalk, or a stapler. All those things can be characters too. So those are a few things to think about. Now let's say you've drawn your character, you've written your character, and you want to put them in a setting. So another thing you can do on your blank sheet of paper is create a world. You can draw a map, you can draw buildings, you can draw a neighborhood. Where is your neighborhood? Where is your setting? What do the buildings look like? If your setting is in space, your buildings may look different from a setting that's underwater, for example. So that's a very easy thing you can do when sitting in front of the blank page, is to create a world. And I say easy because all you have to do is put your pen or pencil on the paper, or if you're using a digital device, put your hand on the cursor or the touch screen and create. And when you hear that little voice of self-doubt saying, this doesn't look good, this doesn't look right, ignore it and just keep powering through. Ignore that little voice. It doesn't matter. You're creating something just for you, just to put something in the world, just for the sake of being brave and creative. Now, after you've created creatures, after you've created characters, after you've created a setting, I would love if you'd share them with me. And if you or your parent are on social media, I'm on Twitter at Erin Entrada. I'm also on Instagram at Erin Entrada. I encourage you to use these tips to create your own characters, create your own world. And even if you don't show them to anyone else, even if you throw them in the trash, you have put something in the world that only exists because of you. And for that, congratulations.